You guys are going to ask each other the questions. But of course, if the audience, people out there in virtual land, have questions for these folks, please put them in the chat. So we're inviting to the stage Julia and Ashley, Em and Elyse, Chris and Lisa, and David and Kevin. I know you guys didn't work together. So go ahead, students, introduce yourself and your mentor, what you were supposed to do, what you ended up doing. And if you weren't, if you're not here with your mentor, just say who they are. And if you're here without your student, just say who they are. So we're going to start with Ashley and Julia, and then Em and Elyse, and then Chris and Lisa, and then David and Kevin. So go ahead, take it away. I think Ashley is our first student.
Julia's the student.
Darn it.
That's okay. So my name is Julia Gren, and this is Dr. Ashley Murky. She is my mentor. She is a professor at Lake Superior State University in the School of Natural Resources and the Environment, and she is also the director of the Center for Freshwater Research and Education. So this past summer, I worked for Michigan Sea Grant and for Lake State at the Grayling Fish Hatchery, which is located in Grayling, Michigan. So my original project, my purpose there was to write an operations manual and to focus on community outreach projects such as really one project, which was helping them develop a self-guided tour and just like help them maintain the hatchery and teach them strategies for how to raise fish. So that was the original project, and I was supposed to be open 5 days a week, open to the public. However, COVID really changed that, and we had to put restrictions on how often we were available to the public. So I still wrote the operations manual, and I still focused on community outreach initiatives, but I really ballooned that project into a bunch more projects. So it was very centered, independent project centered, and just community outreach centered. So that's it for, I guess, introductions. But now I guess we have to ask questions. So one question that I guess we have for Dr. Murky is, how often did we connect with each other, and what platforms did we use? Well, basically, how did we communicate about my project?
So do you want us to start with questions right away, or do you want to do?
Yep, that's fine.
Okay. Yeah. So with Julia and I, we were, I don't know, about 3 hours away. And so we really communicated primarily by email and Zoom. And one of the things that was great about Julia is she's a fantastic communicator. So it was really clear when she was having struggles or needed additional assistance. She didn't hesitate to reach out to me, and we could just quickly, send a Zoom link and connect that way. So we would discuss her ideas and concerns kind of at a moment's notice. But she also had a kind of second supervisor on site where she was. So I think she had some additional support in place. So if I wasn't there, I think she was able to still get some resources to help her move forward quickly.
Yes. And then the second question is, how do you think my project shifted in response to COVID?
Well, I think your project just shifted in a lot of ways, because the project Julia had, required her to interact with multiple stakeholders. So she was hosted by kind of Lake Superior State University, but it was in collaboration with 2 nonprofit groups. And so that meant she kind of had 3 people that were involved in making decisions. And, for an undergraduate, I think that's a real challenge. I mean, it's a real challenge for anybody, but certainly for an undergraduate who's off-site to navigate that can be a challenge. And then you throw in COVID. And so, as she had mentioned, part of her responsibilities were to help develop operations for a hatchery that included a visitor center. It kind of had a kids fishing area, and it was a major tourist attraction. And so it was a huge concern when COVID came about that the city and some of the stakeholders didn't want to close it down. And they fought very hard to keep it open, but there were concerns about Julia and the other people's safety. And so she had to navigate a pretty difficult situation to make sure that they could offer what they wanted in a way that was going to ensure everybody was safe. And I was amazed. She did have to revise her plans, but she learned a lot about how to have those difficult conversations, how to be innovative, how to adapt. And I don't think she would have had those same opportunities to learn in that environment if COVID wouldn't have been here. So I actually think there's a lot of good things that came out as a result of that. Wouldn't you agree, Julia?
I do agree with that. It was definitely changing everything that was originally supposed to be.
So, okay, so it's my turn to ask you questions then. So what do you think was the most valuable part of your experience?
As you touched on, it was definitely interacting with those multiple organizations. So yes, there were a few different stakeholders, like it was working with Lake Superior State and trying to accomplish the goals that we set for us and for Michigan Sea Grant for that internship. And then it was working with the Grayling Hatchery Board to make sure that their vision for the hatchery was shown through, but also the anglers of the Ausable, because they have a very deep connection to the hatchery as well, and the county, to make sure that we were open and we were complying with what our contract stated, and just the community itself, because there was a bad rap from previous farms that were working there. So it was just so many different people and working with different organizations and figuring out what their structure was and how they communicated, and also the DNR, working with them if there were disease outbreaks and different issues that we had with that. So it was pulling a bunch of different ideas together into one cohesive plan and being able to execute that and make everybody happy. That I definitely learned about.
And I think recognizing too that maybe sometimes it's okay that your plan is going to change. I think,
Yes.
For undergraduates, that's the thing I notice is that, sometimes you guys are focused on the path, and it's a challenge when that changes, but I think you did a really nice job. So what about thinking about your career path? So how do you think participating as a Sea Grant intern and this experience will affect your career opportunities in the future? And would you recommend participating in Sea Grant programming to others?
I would definitely recommend Sea Grant programs to anyone else. There were a ton of opportunities for networking and skill development, but I think that this job or this opportunity really taught me about what I wanted to do in the future. And that I really enjoyed community outreach and generating those materials for people. That was really interesting. So opportunities for the future is that it gave me a background in community outreach, and it further refined conveying technical ideas to the public in a way that they would understand. And I think that was a big challenge that I faced this summer, but I learned a lot about how to do that.
So maybe before we wrap up, can you just mention what this opportunity has resulted in for you in terms of the Grayling hatchery?
Yeah, actually, so they offered me an advisory position on their executive board of the hatchery, and I did accept that position, non-voting, but they wanted me to stay on so I could carry out my vision of what the public outreach stuff would be. So educational signs and just making sure everything in the visitor center was up and running before the summer came along.
Yeah, and I think that's such a fantastic, kind of acknowledgement of what you've done for them, because even though you had to often provide some feedback that I don't think they wanted to hear, they really did clearly value that. And now they've asked you to stay on and participate in their board. And, as a recent graduate, I just think that's a huge honor. So you should be really proud of what you're able to do.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, Julia and Ashley, that was super inspiring. Thank you so much. Ashley, you should be proud of your mentorship, and Julia, congratulations. That is such a wonderful honor.
Thank you.
So we are going to move forward now. I'm inviting M. Cook, if you're on the phone, and Elyse Granick to the stage. So this fellowship, I think, our internship was a little different, because I think this one was conceived as remote from the beginning. But Em, if you're on, would you like to introduce yourself? Okay, that was what I was afraid of. I don't think Em is able to join us, unfortunately. But Elyse Granick is here, and Elyse was a Sea Grant mentor for Em and a couple other students on this project. So Elyse, do you want to spend a couple of minutes talking about the project and what your students did?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Sarah. So we have an organization called the Oregon's Oregon Coastal and Ocean Information Network. I always mess up the acronym. And the idea is that it's an organization that brings scientists and decision makers together via two media. So we have a web-based interface on the Oregon Explorer website called Coastal Research. That's our part of the Oregon Explorer website. And it is an opportunity for researchers to put in information about research projects on the Oregon coast that they've either completed, that they are currently conducting, or that they have gotten are in the works doing, so that decision makers, so scientists, so managers and policymakers know what kind of research and data are available for the Oregon coast and our nearshore marine systems. And then the other piece of that is that we run an annual meeting with the intent of networking between these sort of different spheres. So between scientists, be they state or federal or academic scientists, and decision makers, be they managers or policymakers. And so we have had an intern that has worked at least partially remotely for the last several summers that was funded from a grant that has since run out. And so we were really lucky this year to have support from Oregon Sea Grant to support a summer scholar that would be in this fellowship position or this internship position. And so we had a really interesting opportunity in that we originally had, one spot for an intern, and we had applicants to that spot. And then we had an opportunity to sort of provide additional internship opportunities to the, Sarah, please correct me if I say this wrong, but to the Doris Duke Conservation Scholars Program. Is that correct? Okay. Because they had interns, they have a program and they have students that have been in the program for several years, that it's now their opportunity to do a summer internship, but all of the in-person summer internships were canceled because of COVID. And so we were asked if we could take on a couple additional interns that could work with OCOIN. And we really jumped at the opportunity because we have lots of work that can be done to improve OCOIN, to improve our web interface, to get more researchers to put their information in, to work with the universities to try to encourage them to have researchers be required to put their information in when they have grants, for instance, and to help plan our annual meeting. So instead of one intern, we ended up having 3 awesome interns this summer. And so we had Angela Arrington, M. Cook, and Jenna Livingston, 3 awesome young women worked with us. And they were each in different states, and only one was in Oregon, but they all worked on the project together. And I think one of the advantages perhaps of COVID is we would have only had 1 student otherwise, but because we had 3, we really had this cohort, and they just worked together so well and really helped each other sort of grow over the summer, helped each other with projects. They each had their own sort of primary project they were working on with OCOIN, but they several of the projects they worked in a team, with one sort of being the lead if it was that student's project. And I think that, the feedback we got from them, we held weekly Monday morning, like 30-minute check-in meetings with the 3 of them, but they got together much more frequently via Zoom, and I think they were really active on Slack. And I think they said that one of the biggest benefits for them was having the opportunity to work with each other and having each other be support, right, on this project, that they supported each other on the project. I'm trying to hit on as many of those questions. I don't know, Sarah.
No, you're doing great. I keep trying to jump in and ask you questions, and then you're asking about yourself. So it's good. You're like the Oprah Winfrey of self-interviewing on here.
That's awesome.
And yeah, I mean, you guys did an amazing job of handling, not 1, but like you said, 3 interns. And I know that you have had a lot of experience doing that, and you had a good team. Mm-hmm. Some former students and fellows being part of that. So what did you learn either this year or throughout your years of mentoring student fellows on the OCOIN project, some who are in person and some who are remote?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've learned that really regular communication is very helpful so that they don't get stuck. And, this is something that, any faculty here know with their own graduate students. But for students, that if we can have regular check-ins, even if it's 15 or 20 minutes once a week, it provides an opportunity for a student to not get stuck for too long on a project that they're working on, that they may have hit a dead end, or it may have hit a snag that none of us were expecting. And, if we don't have those regular check-ins, then they can sort of, any of us can kind of flail for longer than necessary. But I think in this situation, it was even, we had these weekly Monday check-ins with everyone, but I think they, as a cohort, it was just such a great opportunity because when they got stuck, they would immediately reach out to each other and try to problem solve. And so I think, our weekly meetings were helpful, but they also developed their own mechanism for problem solving by having a team. So, I mean, of course, it's not realistic to expect that there's resources for us to have multiple interns every summer in the future, but I do think it is it was a great opportunity to see how the three of them really problem solved together.
Yeah, and I wonder, as we think about programs in the future, if there's ways that we can create that cohort. Maybe they're not all working on, interrelated projects, but just making sure that students who are doing these types of opportunities, have those, chances to get together and help each other, like you said, get unstuck, so that they're not sitting there sort of wondering what's next.
Yeah.
I feel like there should be one more boom wrap-up question for you, Elyse. Do you have one that's at the tip of your mind? Or should I ask you the question about, the fact that OCOIN has been moving forward with such great involvement from students? What do some of those students who have, moved on into other roles in the OCOIN network, what kind of roles do they play? Like, what's your strategy? What's your tip for like building that depth, building that great army of students that then fledge and go do great things into the world?
Yeah, that's a great point. So I don't know if we intentionally designed this in the program, but it's really happened, is that so 3 of our interns, I think it's 3 of our interns, were interns for a summer and then went on to graduate from grad school and get positions in the state. And they've then come onto our, we have a steering committee. So it's an all volunteer organization, and we had funding to get started, but we don't really have sort of ongoing funding. And so everyone sort of volunteers for different subcommittees of the steering committee. But yeah, 3 of our steering committee members were interns on the project. And so they have such great in-depth knowledge of the project because they were like in the trenches trying to make progress on different parts of the project at different points or different parts of the organization. I would say that one in particular, well, I guess 2 of the 3 actually took real leadership roles this summer, mentoring our 3 interns. And I think it was great because it's like a great system because they really know what it's like to be an intern, and now they're sort of on the other side on the steering committee, but they just have great advice and insights for the students in terms of how to manage their time, where else to look for resources, what other training opportunities may be available during the summer. And so I think it's actually made the organization a lot stronger because we have these students that have been so embedded in the trenches of the work and then come into the steering committee later to stay engaged. And I know one of our 3 students is interested. So Angela is one of the 3 students that is from Oregon, is still in Oregon, is in grad school down in Eugene. And I think she is interested in, at some level, staying engaged, because she is here in the state. So I think if we can continue to do that, it's great for the organization and for the forward movement of the organization. And I don't know how we've managed to make that happen each time, but so far so good. So yeah.
That's awesome. We'll bottle that. I mean, I think that that's a great direction to go. And, that experience plus what Julia was just talking about in terms of, whatever organization you're working for, trying to get that connection, maintain those, maintain those interactions rather than just, fledging people off into the world, which is also good.
Yeah.
But it's nice to have that, keep the intellectual property, close in the organization.
I just add one more quick thing. I was just going to say
Yes.
also the experience they've had as an intern has made them really marketable for the things that they've gone on to do. So I think, you know, three of them have gone on to have like Sea Grant fellowships, I guess, with agencies after they graduated from grad school. And I think that they were probably seen as more marketable for those positions because of their experience as interns in this with Ocoin.
So if you do have to let them go, you know at least they're well prepared and they're going off and giving somebody else an awesome person to get some stuff done.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Elyse. Thanks for being a great mentor. And so we are going to transition now, and we're going to hear from Chris and Lisa. So, Chris, do you mind introducing yourself, introducing your mentor and your project? And you guys have, let's see, I think about 8 minutes or so to have this conversation. So go ahead.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. So my name is Chris Schmokel. I'm a student at Oregon State University. I'm majoring in environmental chemistry. And I worked for a long time before being in school in the maritime industry. And I've always been, you know, kind of a passionate water person. I do a lot of sailing and scuba diving. And so going back to school, my goal has been to be involved in natural resource conservation and wildlife conservation. And I picked environmental chemistry because I really had an interest in the chemistry underlying a lot of these issues. And that was my goal in participating in the Sea Grant program as well. I kind of had this feeling like this is an area where I want to make my career, but I really was hoping to get some experience seeing how does that actually work? What does that actually look like working for agencies or you know, what sort of jobs are available out there in the real world? So I was originally going to be working with the DEQ, or excuse me, I was going to be working with the EPA on a project on ocean acidification based out of their lab in Lincoln City. But right before the start of the internship, there was a big outbreak of COVID there in Lincoln City, and we kind of made a last minute transition. And Lisa Cox at the Oregon DEQ was kind enough to take me on board as part of her project over the summer. And I worked on a sort of a two-pronged project. The first was looking at copper in copper-based boat paint. So it's a kind of a protective paint that recreational boaters will put on the bottom of their boats. Has an unfortunate side effect that it leaks copper into the aquatic environment. Lisa has been looking at this for a while. They've got some legislation that restricts the use of this paint in Washington, also in California, but nothing really in Oregon. So that was kind of one of Lisa's focuses. She also is a coordinator. So Lisa is a toxic reduction analyst at the DEQ, and she's also the coordinator for another Sea Grant internship program called the Oregon Applied Sustainability Experience. And one of my kind of hobbies, I guess, would be making short videos. And Lisa wanted me to make a video highlighting a lot of the work that the interns are doing as part of that internship experience. So that's my introduction, and I'll carry on with some questions for Lisa here. Lisa, my first question for you, what did you think about how my project shifted in response to COVID?
Oh, that's such a good question. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Lisa Cox. I work for the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality in Portland, Oregon. And I think that there were so many shifts that Chris had to go through during the entire internship. First, mentally transitioning from working for the EPA, which is a very exciting endeavor, in a lab, to working at home at kind of more of a research project that was maybe not as initially interesting or maybe fulfilling as he had hoped. But once Chris learned more about the project, I think he was truly understanding all of the different pathways and links and conversations that needed to happen with multiple stakeholders to move this type of project forward. And I think there was a lot of learning in terms of you know, how a research project starts and then is funded and managed and all of the different intricacies of the pre-project work. So I think that was a lot of good. In response to COVID, I think it's just a lot of flexibility of learning from home or working from home and trying to reach people in a different and maybe new way.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. It was a big change of gears, but it was a great experience. I'll kind of talk more about this I think later, but it ended up being a really good experience, and I definitely learned a lot of things I wasn't expecting to learn, but really important things. So Lisa, my next question for you: what opportunities did we have to interact with Sea Grant staff, and would you have preferred more or less?
Well, I think that more communication is usually really valuable. But when I think we were meeting about weekly, is that right? Yeah, I think that was about right for us with Chris and I on a project level basis. And in terms of the Sea Grant connection, I think we had enough access. Sarah and Jenny from Oregon Sea Grant work together on a very regular basis. So I think we were able to connect as much as possible, and it was efficient and sufficient for what we were doing at that time.
Yeah, I would agree. I think you know, Lisa and sorry, Sarah and Jenny and also Stephanie from the Oregon Sea Grant were just incredibly helpful. So it was great to, you know, we got a number of opportunities to meet with them, and that was wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of kind of my, I guess, questions for you, if you don't have any more for me, I can kind of connect or ask you some things as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So in terms of your experience, what do you think was the most valuable part? And do you think that it would have been different if COVID would not have happened? Of course, you'd be with the EPA, so that would be a significant difference.
It would have been a significant difference. You know, as I kind of mentioned, the original project was to be working at a lab, working on ocean acidification measurements, and I think that definitely, you know, coming into the internship, you know, that's kind of my comfort zone, I guess. I'm more of a, I guess I have more experience doing hands-on work, working in the field or working in the lab on projects. And that was kind of my expectation coming into the program. And it was a challenge. I definitely had to push outside my comfort zone and get some experience doing some new things. And I think it was really valuable. The project we were working on, the copper-based boat paint project, initially, I guess it seemed like a pretty straightforward sort of thing. But the more I learned about it and the more people I talked to, the more complicated I realized it was. And I had a chance to talk to a lot of people on this issue. So I talked with people, you know, in the water quality professionals from DEQ. I talked to researchers at Oregon State looking at water quality. I talked to agencies that had more kind of a community outreach focus, like the Oregon State Marine Board. And I also got a chance to talk to people, kind of stakeholders in the community, people that were running marinas and boaters. And I got a new appreciation for kind of the policy side of science. As I said, I've always kind of been focused on more of the lab-based side of things so far. And the policy side of things, I think, is quite a bit more challenging in a lot of ways. You know, there's a lot of people involved, and everyone sort of has a different outcome that they want to see. And I you know, I had a whole experience where I learned about Washington's regulations about copper-based boat paint and how that sort of came into being. And it was really an eye-opening experience, because the path that bit of legislation took to become a law was not at all what I was expecting. And it was so it was a great experience to kind of see how the policy side of things are done, and kind of get a better understanding for the importance of that, because I think, you know, there's only so much that can be done in the hard science as far as actually making a change.
Yeah, and I think Big Lessons was about the science is there. We have the science already in Washington and California, yet Oregon was still reluctant to move forward. So I think it was really eye-opening through the experience to see how much science we really needed. So I think that was a great lesson. Do we have time for another program or another?
Unfortunately, we do have to move on because we have folks in the panel that we want to hear from. Lisa and Chris, it was great working with you both this summer. One of the things I really appreciated was how well you communicated with each other and with us. And I know that you guys could probably keep talking for another 12 months at least. So thank you both for being here today. And if anybody has questions for you or any of the other panelists who've spoken so far, please put them in the chat. So we're going to move on and hear from our last two folks. David Vasquez, will you please introduce yourself and your project?
Can you hear me? Awesome. Okay. So my name is David Martinez Vasquez, and I am a junior studying biology and geography at Calvin University in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So this summer, I was an intern at Michigan Sea Grant. And my advisors were Dr. David Warners at Calvin University and Deanna Gehold, the project coordinator or the program coordinator of Plaster Creek Stewards. So my project had two parts. The first part involved working with high school students from around the Grand Rapids area that live within the Plaster Creek watershed. And the goal of that was to teach those high school students about watershed ecology, environmental justice issues, and just the role of green infrastructure in dealing with those issues. My second part of the project involved designing an experiment which looked at which Michigan native trees best inhibit the growth of invasive reed canary grass. For the most part, my project this summer was it carried out as it was supposed to. We did most of our work outside, but we did implement a lot of COVID-19 preventative measures like wearing masks, sanitizing our tools, and making sure that we were distanced from each other when we're doing our work. And yeah, it turned out, I'm glad it was able to carry out.
Awesome. Thanks, David, and thanks for being here with us today. David, thank you so much for sharing a bit about your project. So you worked with a bunch of different people this summer, both high school students you mentioned, but then the other folks who were involved in your projects. So what were some of the platforms that you used in those different groups?
Enter your access code or meeting number followed by pound.
Yeah, I can talk about that. So since we were in person, a lot of the communication was just, in person. But when we were not in person, we used a lot of text to communicate with each other, especially my coworkers, fellow student coworkers. But we also use Zoom and emails to communicate with folks at Sea Grant and Michigan Sea Grant, and to reach out to the high school students for bigger meetings that we had with them. We also use Slack a little bit to communicate with the Sea Grant folks and the other interns, the other undergraduate interns. Mm-hmm.
Cool, thank you. But the high school students preferred text. I'm not surprised.
Yes, they did.
Okay, thank you, David. Kevin, I think that we were able to hear you and see you. So do you want to introduce yourself and the project that you worked on, please?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so my name is Kevin Keeler. I work at the USGS Great Lakes Science Center in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Newly converted to federal position. Previously, I've been a contracted employee. Sorry, we have some. There we go. So the person I was working with, student Kira Matiska, She was a junior, now a senior at University of Michigan. We had previously been looking at parasitism with sea lamprey and lake trout using bioenergetics and respirometry. And that study was developed in February, and then March happened. And so we had a lot of difficulty with sort of following up on that. The original idea would be she would come in, manage fish, do day-to-day activities, prepare trials, run those trials on her own, manage the data on her own, and then analyze and then do a poster creation and a PowerPoint. Well, like I said, COVID happened. So our building completely closed down. I, along with 2 or 3 other individuals, were the only ones allowed in the building. We didn't know when we would necessarily open back up. We didn't know if we were able to actually travel to pick up these specimens to run these trials, because it was 350 miles away at a hatchery. We didn't know if that hatchery would even allow us to show up. And we didn't know if a volunteer individual or intern like Kira would actually be able to come into the building. Ultimately, when the project started in June, we still had restrictions preventing her from coming into the building. So we had to completely change everything, change the fish we were using to just like trout, do everything remotely by phone and through email, and that's how we ultimately had to get through it, is doing a completely hands-on project and moving it to completely virtually.
How did it go? What was your takeaway from the virtual opportunity?
It was incredibly humbling and difficult initially, because every single week in April we would get updates on our end about the new restrictions or what we were actually going to be able to do, just as researchers in general, not even including this internship possibility. So I had to communicate with her that either I had information, which was very rare, or to just sort of sit tight and wait until we had more information. And so I realized that's incredibly frustrating on a student's part. But eventually, by the time June rolled around, we were able to do that travel exclusive of her. But we could go pick up those animals, bring them here. I could collect all that data, send it to her. So usually you want to do things in terms of showing, don't tell, being really hands-on. But when you move virtually, you have to sort of do both. You have to explain what you're doing, which is we explain to her how I'd be doing the project, sans her, and then explain to her how to work on that data, which would have been easy to do in person, but you have to do it, completely virtually.
So sounds like both getting started and then even when the project was started, there was some barriers and hurdles, but sounds like you guys made it through the other side, which kind of seems like the story that we've been hearing throughout this afternoon's panel. So I want to thank all of our panelists from the undergraduate student / mentor panel, Julia, Ashley, Elyse, Chris, Lisa, David, and Kevin. Thank you all so much for participating here.